Good evening and welcome. It is very lovely to see so many of you here. I am Damian Barr and I am your host for this very special salon celebrating the world premiere of Drama. And look at all my notes in there. Written by David Rockwell and published by Phaidon. David will be joining us live in a few minutes from Los Angeles, where he is busy conjuring the set for the Academy Awards for the third time. I've got my acceptance speech ready just in case. Thank you for joining us tonight, wherever you are. I've been hosting salons all around the world since we started at Shoreditch House in 2008, and many of you watching tonight have been with us in lots of those places. Last year, we added salons online, which means that you can now join us from the comfort of your own home. Recent salon guests include Garth Greenwell, Douglas Stewart, Russell T Davis, Ruth Coker-Burks, and Maggie O'Farrell, and John Waters, whose 75th birthday it is today, the man who created Hairspray, which David conjured the Broadway set for. Nice link. You can find them all on our podcast or YouTube channel. Welcome back to all our regular Salonistas. I see we are joined by Becky Sunshine in London, Simon and AJ, Louise, Hemo and Dee in Brighton, Al in Edinburgh, and Lauren Sarand in New York, and lots more of you. So thank you for being with us. Welcome wherever you are. And if you're not watching live, now is a good time to pause and fix a drink. While you're getting settled, I'll just explain how tonight's going to work. You can chat with one another and submit questions in the chat, and I'll try to get to as many of those questions as possible. And David and I will join you in the chat after. We're also giving away a copy of Drama to one of you watching, so stay tuned for that. We've got lots more salons coming up in the next few weeks and months. Paris Lee's with Alexandra Hemmensley on May the 14th, Kate Moss with Sam Baker on June the 3rd. Details and tickets on our website, which is just www.theliterarysalon.co.uk. To tonight and the world premiere of Drama, which celebrates the award-winning work of acclaimed American architect and designer David Rockwell. And it's a series of conversations and explorations that makes you feel cleverer and kinder after, I have to say. I first encountered David's work way back when I was a journalist at the Times. I used to write a column for Bricks and Mortar, the Times Homes and Interior section. But most recently, I stood in his work at 15 Hudson Yards in New York. If you stayed at the W in New York, Paris, Singapore, or Madrid, lucky you, you've slept in his work. David's output encompasses buildings, interiors, and sets, all linked by his lifelong passion for drama. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. These range from actual theatres like the Hayes Theatre to over 50 theatrical productions. His first was the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and also Tootsie, which I think you can see on your screen now, and then A Midsummer Night's Dream, a very Central Park-inspired A Midsummer Night's Dream. Other fleeting moments include the TED Theatre in Vancouver, a pop-up where visionaries inspired the world. And if you've seen lots of those TED videos, you'll have seen that space. And permanent structures, such as the Centre for Civil and Human Rights in Atlanta, which I very much want to go to. All of these demonstrate David's outstanding commitment to building community. He's won many accolades, including the Presidential Design Award, but few architects can also boast a Tony. Please welcome, all the way from Los Angeles, the brilliant David Rockwell. David, hello.
Hello, Damian. Thank you for that amazing introduction. I wish it were drink time here in LA, I've got to say.
Oh God, of course it's the afternoon with you, isn't it?
It's water time here.
Okay, it's always water time there. I'm so glad that you could join us. Thank you so much for having your world premiere with us.
It's very exciting. Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure, absolute pleasure. So it seems like a reasonable place to start at the Academy Awards. This is the third time that you've conjured the set, and this year it's happening in Union Station in downtown LA. Tell us a wee bit about it.
Well, so my history with the Academy Awards goes back to the Kodak Theater, now called the Dolby, which we were the architects for and opened in 2002. And sort of interesting that in that case, of course, it was purpose built for the Academy Awards. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, it was this anomalous theater that would have live theater about the films, but mostly seen on TV.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of effort to create a kind of classic opera house theater and embed all the technology. I never expected in 2008 to be asked to do the sets for the Oscars. And actually, my first question to Bill Condon, who invited me to do it, is, do we think that this is an interesting adventure? I mean, people watch the Oscars to see the stars. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, first of all, working in a building where I'd been an architect and doing the sets was a great way to test the building.
Yeah. Does what I did work?
And it was, of course, a thrilling, exciting, terrifying experience. And I think a little bit of terror along with excitement indicates it's the right project to be on.
Yeah.
And then I did it the next year, 2009, and had a conflict in 2010 in New York and sort of got out of doing it and had been doing many other things. And then got a phone call about this year, which was a fascinating thing to consider, given how different the world is right now. And when I signed on board and was grateful, it's Steven Soderbergh, who's an amazing director, Jesse Collins and Stephen Scher, who are great producers. And, we asked ourselves, what can we do this year that that acknowledges, after this terrible year of being shut in and major upheavals and a very difficult year on every level, people do have a kind of need to connect with other people and share stories and have a celebration of the communal art forms that have been missing. And that became the kind of early drivers of the process that landed us in Union Station, which I don't know how much you know about that, but you would have known it from the movies. Many movies have been shot there. Super iconic, 1939 Art Deco building, but like a typical Los Angeles production, a kind of mashup of Mission and Art Deco. And we're taking some of these large spaces like the ticketing hall, which has an incredible 40-foot tall ceilings. There'll be light pouring in. So every element of the Oscars is based around, can we create a small venue? It's only the nominees and one invited guest. So there's
no audience. There's no kind of big panning out to lots of socially distanced people.
There will be a live audience, and every molecule is, based on the latest COVID protocol. It's in pods of 2, and the nominees will be there. But we could go into lots of detail, but
sure.
every part about it required some level of reinvention. Ultimately, the goal was to have those nominees feel honored. So we're surrounding the room with an open screen with a portrait gallery for each category, and you're in this vast hall. So you're in a screened-in room, looking at this larger room, and I think the TV audience will, in some ways, feel like they're invited into something that started out in 1929 being very simple. The Oscars were a seated dinner just for the nominees. So we went back and looked at those productions. We looked at the spaces, actually, that those were produced in the hotels in LA, and we're intrigued about setting it there, but thought a live audience wanted to be in a bigger space, and that's how we sort of tracked to Union Station.
Well, I saw the renderings when they came through the other day, and I got sent some more details today. And when I saw the picture, it brought back a memory of something. Of course, these images are coloured, but it brought back a memory of something in black and white. And it's taken me days to find it, but I did eventually find it. And it's Oscar footage from when the actress who won, the first black actress who won for Best Supporting Actor, I can't remember what the year was.
And Hattie McDowell, I believe.
Hattie McDowell. What was the year for Gone with the Wind? I can't remember now.
I'm gonna guess 1936, but
it was what you have done was evocative of that moment for me. It felt intimate and it felt gracious, but it also felt celebratory, and that's quite a thing to pull off.
In human scale, not dwarfing the human beings, but you're exactly right. That was kind of the goal, is to have it really be at the scale of human beings.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing with the Oscars, but with big awards, we see it, with the Booker, and we see it in architecture too, is that you get a sense of something being bestowed from down upon, to on high to below. And what you've done is create something that's more about, almost like awards being about a shared experience of enjoying something, or if we all think this is the best, we all think you're the best, we all think this is the best film. So it's really special. So I'm really looking forward to seeing it on TV. I really wish that I was there on that red carpet, but I'll be watching it on TV instead.
One of our inspirations is not unlike the wall behind you. We looked at the John Soanes Museum, and the notion of images creating a wall, but with space in between them. And those images will be of the nominees, and they're able to change throughout the evening. So when you're honoring the honorees, you get to see the history of people in that category at the same scale as the human beings that are being honored.
Oh, that's going to be beautiful and dynamic too, as well. Because I think the other thing that happens sometimes, you'll be watching an award ceremony and you can sometimes almost feel the thing aging before you, or slightly falling apart if they've completed it at the last minute. So it'll be lovely to have something that's dynamic. Well, congratulations on it. I want to come to now talking.
Say the congratulations for Sunday night or Monday morning.
Oh, okay. I mean, is it still very much being built right in this exact moment in time?
It is being built. Yeah, it's being built, and now we're on camera, so we're looking at things on camera and adjusting, and it is totally thrilling. One small detail I just want to share, because I think it's surprisingly relevant to the stuff I researched for the book. And that is, limitations are helpful. Unlimited resources. I think the idiosyncrasies of a space or of a client or a site are some of the most interesting things to base a design around. And being in a landmark space where you can't mount any equipment to the ceiling at all, and you can't mount anything to the floor, so we're self-contained. One thing we thought about is how much everyone loves sitting at a table around a candle, which is a kind of hearth. So we created these beautiful shades that are very specific to the Oscars. Those sit on the table at these tables for two, and that front light actually becomes the main lighting on the audience. So there'll be a kind of intimacy that you rarely see at something like that, because in fact the lighting is happening at the scale of the person.
Oh, that sounds very on team. You just know that, like, if somebody doesn't win an Oscar but they really like that lamp, it's going straight in their goodie bag at the end of the night. You're not getting those lamps back.
Yeah, I gotta look at the attachment system today when I get there.
I'd work on that. Will you give us a wee reading from the book before we talk about it more in depth? I would love to hear you talking about it.
Sure, I would love to do that.
Thank you.
I'm going to read something from an essay that I call Empathy as a Starting Point.
Okay.
Which is rarely referred to as a design brief. Before I knew how to speak, before I even liked or knew about design, I wanted to bring people together. Then I discovered theater. Theater, I found, united people in feeling and in story. It was a source of energy, of escape, delight, novelty, and community. And it was central to my family's life. My mother, a former vaudeville dancer, helped found a tiny community theater in my hometown of Deal, New Jersey. And I was part of those shows. I would act, play music, work on the sets. All four of my brothers were stagehands. I was seduced by all of the preparation, and I was intrigued by how the theater energized this very sleepy suburb. Everyone in town was involved. They were all communicating and making something, and it became my fascination. I was also fascinated by making things on my own. We had a detached garage with a second story that was really my laboratory. And I'd collect stuff, safety cones, roller blinds, wind chimes, anything. And I started to make installations, Rube Goldberg-like contraptions, Halloween houses, elaborate lemonade stands, and I loved how people would gather by them. They became a part of the community. Years later, at the School of Architecture at Syracuse University in upstate New York, I began to notice how spaces adapt to the people inside of them, how they respond to the users. And I became intrigued by what happens if you clarify that response with a story. I was always interested in the why of it. It gave spaces more depth, more heart. And in my second year, I had to design a townhouse with two very different entry sequences. So I wrote a narrative about who lived there and why they lived there, why they had made those choices. My approach was no less rigorous than those of others in the class, but I did get in trouble for it. Narrative wasn't something many architects were interested in. When I moved to New York, I realized early on that its buildings weren't just buildings. They were collections of many different lives. Every element represented something or someone, and it was their ground floors that gave the city its life. There was a humanity to this grouping of constructions. That's when I realized I wasn't just interested in structures and spaces. I was interested in people and how they were impacted by structures and spaces. That revelation stuck with me. Buildings, spaces, all things become more meaningful when they're designed around people, around stories, and around feelings. That is the connection with theater. Theater, too, reflects our lives and our experiences. It embodies our stories and our emotions. And like a building, theater is nothing without its audience. Architecture and theater are both defined by the people that inhabit and animate them. This has been illustrated all too well by the COVID-19 pandemic. Without an audience enlivening its streets, its museums, its restaurants, a city is only an empty frame. When I built my first Broadway theater set for the Rocky Horror Show, it was an opportunity to create a new kind of world, a way to engage more intimately with an audience, to get their immediate feedback, to take risks, to follow my instincts, and to learn hard lessons, to explore how spaces connect us, enthrall us, and tell our stories, and how they're anchored in human experience. I've now designed hundreds of spaces, more than 50 theater productions, and I've never seen a boundary between architecture and theater. I've always found a connection between those two. When I design a restaurant, I think about how movement can create energy, how lighting can shrink a room or frame a distant view, and how a sequence of spaces can create a dramatic reveal. I think about how design supports the story. When I design a theater set, I think about how to extend the action into the audience, how to bring people closer to the story, how to give them tectonic surprise and transport them with light and sound. So this book is a guide that leads you through the intersection between theater and architecture. My core design instincts have always overlapped with the basic tenets of theater, and they've been informed and amplified by them, infusing my work with emotion, narrative, and the building blocks of memory and common experience. My many years as an architect have given my theater endeavors an enhanced sense of movement, of scale, of intimacy, and of palpable transformation. It's a kind of thrilling feedback loop between the two fields. This book describes my system of thinking and creating, which was born out of that relationship.
Thank you so much for reading that and sharing that with us. You say in there that stories are design, and of course stories come from people, and you gave us a wee bit of your own story there, and I wonder if you could tell us a bit more what it was like growing up with this vaudevillian dancer as your mum and your brothers too as big stagehands.
Sure. As I said, what I didn't say in there is we started out in Chicago, and with 4 older brothers, there was a kind of like troop mentality, and we moved to the Jersey Shore when I was 4. Mm-hmm. And my mom helped to start a community theater. Now, this particular suburb was and is mostly private homes, very little public space, which has really become the focus of my work. Mm. But in the summer, I found this community theater energized, almost turned this little town of Deal, New Jersey, inside out, and everyone wanted to be a part of this summer putting together a show, and all of us in my family worked on it and built sets, and I was, I think, sort of amazed at how it galvanized so many different people and so many different types of people, and then when I was 11, I went with my brothers on our first major trip to New York. I'd been in New York briefly, but not to eat in a New York restaurant and not to see a Broadway show or walk through its streets. And I do think is stereotypical as it might be, that day really did transform me. And it's interesting that as architects, we crave to be in the world of creating permanent. Mm-hmm. But some of the experiences that are most memorable to us are ephemeral. And of course, as we've seen in the past year, nothing is permanent. So going to see Fiddler on the Roof at age 11, I didn't know about Boris Aronson, who designed the sets and has since become a hero of mine and someone I've studied. I knew that 1,300 people in that theater came in as strangers, and through music and sound and visuals, they became a community around this story. Mm-hmm. And that really stuck with me. Then we moved when I was 12 to Guadalajara, Mexico, which could not have been more different than Deal, New Jersey. And for a 12-year-old, it was the best possible infusion of color and light. And I did fall in love with a sense of spectacle, the sense of movement. And I guess my interest in community theater and theater transformed into an interest in public theater and public space. And there were some amazing, and there still are some amazing spaces there. And I just absorbed it. Everything, I became very absorbed into that way of life. And I think my sense of color and light was very much formed during those years from age 12 to 18.
Sorry to interrupt, go on.
No, I'd love to be interrupted.
No, okay. Well, first of all, the community theatre in Deal with your mum and your brothers sounds like an amazing Netflix special limited Schitt's Creek style series that I can't wait to see. I'm very excited about that. I think each series will centre around a different production, and we'll watch you get older and grow up and find love. It's going to be brilliant. But what's really interesting to me is that hearing you talk about your practice, it's all a means to an end of bringing people together, right? Yeah. This, when you read the book and when I talk to you, it's not, oh, I want a building to look like this, or oh, I want a building to do this, or a set to look this way. It's not about perception. It's about interaction and collaboration and bringing people together, even if, I guess, if they don't like it as well. I mean, that's got to be a part of it if people react against it. But the idea is that you're bringing people together for a shared experience, and that is, I think, very innovative. And clearly, when you started out as an architect, you came up against a tradition which wasn't focused on, as you say, empathy isn't a word that was used very much then.
Yeah, it's true. And one of the interesting things about working in the theater is you know, it's a feedback loop that is immediate.
Yes.
So the audience is very much a part of telling that story. And when you're working in the theater, over the course of previews, the audience actually lets you know what they understand and what they don't understand. And I do find some of the smallest design elements, when I think about those early experiences in Guadalajara, you know, you think about the way light struck a wall, or there's a market there. What's the name of the market? Oh my God, I'm blanking on the name of the Mercado. Mercado. I wrote it down somewhere. Incredible 400,000 square foot market. I have to give it a plug.
Okay. The idea of a market right now is so enticing and thrilling.
Mercado Libertad, built in 1958. So it's a concrete, very simple building, but with like 3,000 vendors, all a different minimal art installation selling whatever they're selling. I think those things became seared in my memory, and I think that's what intrigues me as an architect, and it's what organizes our studio. We had a Zoom meeting right after, you know, March 14th, 15th, when things shut down in the city, and you know, we looked at each other on Zoom, and there was a kind of recognition that what we do as a studio is create places for people to engage in real time. And it was a, you know, sobering moment to figure out how we were going to work together and how we were going to find open space and start to think about ways to help get things back together.
I mean, your amazing response to that is Dine Out, which I read about in the New Yorker before I knew I was going to be talking to you. And we'll come back to that in a moment. I just want to go back to the beginning of that kind of adventure, as you describe it in theatre, and the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And you say you learned some hard lessons from that. And I wonder if you could tell us what those lessons were. And also, if audiences do come in and see stuff in previews, do you change wee details and things before it opens? Is that bit of the process interactive, or is it done and it's just they like it or they don't?
No, in theater, in many cases, you have a chance to, if you're out of town before you come to Broadway, if it's a Broadway production, you'll actually you'll leave gaps in the production. I'll tell you one really interesting lesson on Hairspray, and then we can get back to Rocky Horror. But sure. Hairspray, which was my second show, and Jack O'Brien was the director, amazing director. Jerry Mitchell was a choreographer. And my first immersion was a trip to Baltimore with John Waters.
Oh, he's such a joy. What an amazing man. I love him.
Incredible trip. And we looked at, you know, places that had been unchanged, the brownstone buildings, which was called Formstone, and the screens that had been painted over time that represented every different house. And so I had John Waters' spirit. I had the enthusiasm and passion of every designer who over-designs everything. So my first meeting with Jack to present designs, I had filled my conference room with every moment of the show already designed. So, you know, it's what I advise students who come to work with me early on is don't put every idea you ever had into your first project. I didn't listen to that, but I was swept up in the Hairspray John Waters mania moment. So Jack O'Brien looked at all of it, and I think had to be thinking, Jesus. So he put his arm around me. He looked. He said, "Why don't we start with taking everything out of the room, other than the things that make you fall in love with Tracy Turnblad, and let's start telling the story from her point of view."
And what were those
And
things? What were the things that you kept? Do you remember?
Well, her view of the world, and the opening image of the show was her elevated in her bed. If you saw the theater piece,
I did see it. I did.
Yeah, and that came from a conversation with Jerry Mitchell and Jack about her point of view. And then the first thing you see are those brownstone buildings coming in, all at skewed perspectives, in kind of Necco wafer colors, which may be a candy reference you don't get, but it was a very flat pastel colors that was very 60s. And that is her view of the world. Good Morning Baltimore is her love song to Baltimore. So that's where we started. But it was a great lesson in let things evolve little by little, leave open space. And actually, when we went out of town first to do Hairspray, we had no set for the finale, because we wanted to see where the show landed, and we wanted to get a sense of how much the different locations communicated to the audience. So that was something. After the first preview, we knew just what we wanted, and we added it. So you do get that interaction, and then so you do get that dialogue with an audience.
Yeah, and people who pay for their Broadway ticket don't hold back, right? And of course, these days they can just go straight on Twitter and say what they think.
Do they do that?
They do that. They do that.
Do they say mean things sometimes?
Well, I mean, not if they're in a theater with Judi Dench on stage, who famously will attack people if they take a phone out. I wanted to talk just about one other production just before we move on a bit. The Midsummer Night's Dream in New York, which I hadn't seen, but I've seen images of, and it truly is transporting, and it made me think about the power of the forest in Shakespeare as a place of possibility and transformation, and sex and joy and breaking the rules. And this is what Central Park is for New Yorkers, right?
Yeah, it's also example, Damian, of sometimes it's great if things take a long time to happen. And so I've been a fan of the Delacorte Theater since the late 70s, and loved going there, loved the process of waiting online and being in the park and being underneath the stars and seeing those amazing trees. And so I think it was 2016, I was asked to do the summer there. So I did Julius Caesar, and then Midsummer's Night Dream. And the director of Midsummer, Lear de Bossenet, had a really interesting starting point. And I think, where you start to create the story of a building or an environment depends on, it can be the history, it can be the location, it can be one detail, it can be a feeling.
And does that come from you, or does that come from the client, or is it a mixture? I'm always interested to know that.
It's a mixture, but one of the things we do is, if it's a building, we will talk to the owners, the user groups. If it's a children's hospital, for instance, like the Children's Hospital at Montefiore, we will spend a lot of time talking to doctors, talking to nurses, talking to families, and try and find some open space to begin the design process that can develop a strong enough point of view that then your design decisions aren't arbitrary. They're all relative to crafting this complicated, complex story. So hopefully a simple, powerful story, but with lots of sort of complexity. Mm-hmm. So Midsummer's Night Dream, Lear had an idea that the fairies that inhabited the forest would be very, very old senior citizens. And it seemed like such an inspired idea that it was the wisdom of the seniors that allowed this to unfold. And so we looked at the trees in Central Park and started to think about what those trees might look like even more ancient, and researching trees that would take the reality of the park, but as I talk about in the book, you sort of twist the kaleidoscope and just heighten them a little bit. And so we sculpted, we researched, we worked with the director and sculpted these 3 trees, each one on a turntable, that could move and reveal, as you said, what's starting to happen behind the scenes. And it also allowed us to transform the setting by, for the end of the play, putting lanterns all over the trees that they would rotate into view. But what was interesting is we did 3D wireframes to guide how to make these ancient trees. And those were used as a steel frame, but then the actual application was done by hand. So it had a kind of almost real, sort of magical, surreal quality that looked like it was in dialogue with the trees around it, but maybe 200 or 300 years later, where they had taken on these very ancient forms.
It reminded me of those Victorian decoupage wallpapers. It had this very textured, slightly chaotic look. And then when I read more about it, I discovered that you'd used that plastic that you get on hoardings that's normally orange, saying "Don't fall down a hole and sue the city," and you'd got that and made it green, and it kind of had a camo effect, and it was and just weaving the texture of the city, and like that was brilliant. I loved that bit of storytelling. I wish I'd seen that production. I really wish I had.
I wish you had too. It was used. There's a movie called Under the Greenwood Tree that the Public Theater, if you go on the Public Theater's website, and it is As You Like It, done as a musical. That was the Public Works. At the end of the season, the public does something called Public Works, where they get 200 community members to all participate in putting on a play. So you're right. It was like Deal, New Jersey on steroids.
Yes, you keep going back to that moment. It's such an important moment for you. I wonder, when you got into starting to do sets and the direction that's taken you in your creative practice in, and you say, there isn't a boundary between architecture and theatre design. There's a relationship. Obviously, that's reflexive, and they both change as a result of it. I'm trying to think of a kind of sliding doors David Rockwell who didn't get into the theatre design, and what his architecture would look like or feel like, or if he'd even still be an architect. It's an interesting thought.
Yeah, for the first, so I formed my firm in '84, and our first theater production was '99.
Yeah.
So the truth of the matter is, I found the work I was doing in originally restaurants was totally and is totally fulfilling. The restaurant that we did for Danny Meyer, Union Square Cafe, is as satisfying as any other production. Or we're doing an exhibit for the Smithsonian called Futures, in an unbelievable building that has not been renovated. So we're creating a pop-up installation that celebrates the 175th anniversary of the Smithsonian.
That's going to be incredible.
So theater was something that emerged over time. I was very happy to have the time to hone my craft as an architect and explore how to extract a story, to learn with each project, to learn more and more about lighting, to learn about choreography. My interest in choreography, my mother was a choreographer, was totally engaged in the architecture we were doing, because in some ways I think of the door or the entrance is a threshold, much like a proscenium. And, how you enter something and how you move through it, which is a big part of what the Oscars is going to be this year. Since we're in 4 different spaces in Union Station, choreography is as important as anyone's static image.
Well, you've got to block it all out. You're blocking out all these movements, series of movements.
You're blocking them out, and you're seeing what it feels like to move from one to the other, what draws you, what frames it, I think thresholds in our life, thresholds, anniversaries, birthdays, in thresholds physically are such powerful design elements. And that, of course, is a big part of theater. But my point, theater emerged because I went to the theater a lot. And I started to think about wanting to make the leap to working in theater. I was in awe of theater artists. And for 4 or 5 years, I started sketching and going to the theater, keeping sketchbooks, meeting with directors, talking. And the aha moment for me was when I started to realize, researching, interviewing directors, interviewing Hal Prince, interviewing other people who are working in theater, that transitions were the thing that I loved about theater, was how something moves from one place to another. And that's what I loved about architecture. And that was the common element that made me start to think, I'm going to pursue this more proactively. And it was 4 or 5 years of meeting with directors, proposing ideas. It was not an instant switch that went on. It was a process that I think fortunately allowed me to step into it, with a little bit more confidence.
Is there there must be a show or a play that you haven't yet conjured on stage that you would love to get your hands on? Or that you would like to redo?
I do find every new project, I try to look for some element to ramp up what we're doing or what we're looking at. It's an interesting question. I mean, there is a project like Follies, which was a seminal Stephen Sondheim, Hal Prince, Boris Aronson production, which is visually so amazing. That would, I would probably love to do that, but I knew Boris Aronson's wife and then widow quite well, and I collected his work, and I was talking to her about a revival of Fiddler on the Roof that was being proposed, and that was the first show I saw, and I was very intimidated by the idea of stepping into those boots.
Yeah,
and
I bet.
Lisa Aronson advised me, you should do it because worst comes to worst, it won't be very good, and you'll survive that. And many years later, I was offered a revival of On the 20th Century, which was designed by the great Robin Wagner. And I had seen that, and it was unbelievable. And in that case, I called Robin Wagner, and I said, how would you feel about me doing a revival of this? And he said, I would love to see another version of it. You should do it. And I decided not to go back to look at any research on the original production, which was available. It was filmed at Lincoln Center, and just decided to approach it anew.
That's revolutionary, but also quite freeing, because you don't have those other images in your head. It's something I often do when I'm deciding to write about something. I think, am I going to read the other people who've written about this, or am I going to write something and then read them? It's like a vain attempt to try and exist in some kind of creative bubble when we're constantly being, infused with other influences.
Well, there's the blank page you have to face when you're writing something, and it's the same thing we have to face. Although I like to have a huge battery of thoughts and ideas and research before I sit down at the page and let it sort of gestate in my head.
Hilary Mantel, the historical novelist, says that when you're doing research for a novel, you need to read everything, learn everything, and then forget everything before you start. And I just think it's the best advice. It's like you on some subcutaneous level, you know all the rules, and therefore you're free to break them. But you have to get to the point where you know them before you can break them. And you have to be studying the world around you to keep getting new input. I mean, when I look for someone to join my studio, the one most important criteria is curiosity. Any designer or any project where someone thinks they know the answer before they begin is, I know that's a no-fly zone for me. Well, and it's exactly the same. You might think the end of the book that you're starting to write the novel or the play,
Right.
but the characters do reveal themselves to you. The world that you're creating does change the story, and if it doesn't, it's not real. It's not alive. And this is something that I wanted to very quickly ask you before we move on to questions from people who are watching. Is how do you create a space, whether that's a building or a theatre set particularly, and leave enough space for the user or the theatre goer to bring their own story, so that they can make a shared active meaning? How do you do that?
It's a fantastic question, and I think it's a critical point. When I talk about buildings tell a story, of course, that story only exists in relationship to an audience.
Yeah.
So I think I think leaving empty spaces, not solving every design problem. In one example in theater was a very, very powerful experience I had designing The Normal Heart on Broadway, which Larry Kramer had written, I think, in 1984.
Larry Kramer, who just died very sadly.
Who just died, and who I had the great honor to work with, along with the incredible director George Wolfe. And it took place in New York during the AIDS crisis, at the moment in which there weren't really accurate names for what AIDS was. It was this terrifying, scary plague. But there were many, many words written around the issue, writing all, and so George's suggestion was that we deeply look into those words, and they became the building block. The set was only 3 walls, and it's in the book, that uses those words is raised typeface that when grazed with light look like white bricks that you might see from that period in New York. But when front lit, the edge disappears and you see the letters, and the play takes place in that open space that the audience can bring their experience to, with 3 black drapes that get lowered during the show. And at the end, we used a projection to project images of people lost from the pandemic on the stage and then growing out into the house. And so it very much became about open space and the context in which the story would be told.
Coming back to story and your story, I mean, one of your brothers died of AIDS, and you were very actively involved in the design industry fighting AIDS, and so this is those words, that fear, that story, that must have been something that spoke to you really profoundly.
So profoundly, and losing my brother to AIDS was unbelievably difficult time, in that all of his friends died before he did. And, New York, some creative communities totally disappeared. And we did have the time before to know his time was limited. So we sort of went on his bucket list and got to do amazing things. When I lost him, it was such a sense of helplessness. And designers like to feel like you're proactive in the world, and it was such a paralyzing time. It was around that time that I became aware of DIFA, which is the Design Industry Foundation Fighting AIDS. And I was invited to participate in something they called Street of Shops. And I designed a library with Jeremy Irons, actually. And we created this beautiful oasis that was just a place to sort of be together, and all these other designers who were working there. And I had this realization that in some ways it's designers' proactivity, the inclination to make something that is, in some ways the ultimate statement of optimism and moving forward. So, and DIFA became a super important lifeline for me, and it was the first moment in which my studio understood one of the things we can do to, in that case, fight loss is act and, sort of contribute and give back, which is what led to Dine Out that you mentioned during the pandemic. I think it really gives our studio a feeling of like not being helpless and being able to use their craft and their passion, their emotion to make a difference.
I think that Dine Out is, I read about it in the New Yorker piece, and I have friends in the city who, been along and we're talking about something that's a response to a pandemic, this pandemic, not the pandemic you were just talking about, and it's interesting to see what permanent behaviour changes might occur as a result. So Dine Out starts off as temporary. It starts out as pop-up. The Cenotaph in London was a structure to cover a war memorial under construction, and now it's sacrosanct. So I wonder what innovations like Dine Out might become a part of a more permanent part of the fabric of our lives in our cities.
Well, I think one thing it proves out is I think there's going to be much more thought about how our public spaces are used and what's the line, blurring that line between indoors and outdoors. It has allowed experimentation. It's allowed innovation. It's allowed the city to have a kind of celebration. It's allowed many small restaurants, of course, that wouldn't be alive if they weren't able to have that. But now that they're open indoors, the outdoor space is such an interesting contribution to the city, things you see all over Europe. So I think there's going to be some really interesting thinking about the vital need of kind of street space, the relationship of cars to cities versus pedestrians. And I think there's going to be an interesting moment in which things that were pop-up, there's going to be, I think, quite a bit of empty space in parts of New York for years. I don't think the office market is going to come back as it was. I think
do you think people will make those domestic? Do you think they'll become residential? We'll see people moving back who are priced out by the offices, or not? It's not that simple.
I don't think we know, but I think there is going to be a few years here in which medium length ideas will get a runway, in which thinking about something in between pop-up and permanent will get a runway. So I think there'll be lots of interesting ideas about office spaces that also serve as meeting spaces and cafes, as restaurant kitchens that can be cooking kitchens. I think that perhaps day parting and how places live throughout the day in the city will get rethought. So there's God knows there's going to be a lot of challenges.
Do you think people are going to feel residually anxious about being indoors, or do you think people just can't wait to get back and sit at a crowded bar and demand a martini? Says he, speaking entirely for himself.
Well, you speak right from the Roaring '20s. I mean, that was, of course, the reaction then. And one thing that's interesting is there's 41 Broadway theaters. A large part of those theaters, 10 or 15 of them, were built starting right after the pandemic of 1919, which is interesting that there was this growth in that area. So I don't know. I think the truth is none of us knows. It would be great to know. And I'm in a profession where we like to know facts. But I think we're going to have to stay flexible. I think even going indoors, mechanical systems will be something we didn't think about knowing too much about, but we're going to want to know about those. I think sanitation won't be so much a back of house function. I think it will lead to a whole series of innovations that we can't really predict.
I'm going to take some questions. We've got lots of questions, so I'm going to try and take as many as I can. This is a question from the lovely Becky, who says, I understand David has a collection of kaleidoscopes, a word you mentioned earlier. To her, kaleidoscopes speak of light, choreography, magic, and surprise. Can you tell us more about your collection? How many have you got?
I've got close to 100 now.
Gosh.
And it's a cult. You know, people who make kaleidoscopes are sort of few and far between, but there are lots of craftsmen and artisans who continue to work on the art of kaleidoscopes. And there's one particular thing I find most inspiring about them, and that is they take things that you recognize and jumble them in a way and make them fresh and new. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned Union Station being a mashup of different styles. I think that notion of taking fragments from our world and reconfiguring those and creating surprising new ones for me has always been inspired by kaleidoscopes. The other thing is there's many of them that I have where, as opposed to the light coming from the end of the kaleidoscope, there's black glass at the end, and the light comes in from the side, and fragments are suspended in oil or liquid, so you get side light, backlight. I think it's a way to look at light, and for movement, it's very much like out of a Busby Berkeley movie to see those opening forms. And actually, the first year we did the Oscars, the stage was inspired by Michelangelo's Campidoglio, as seen through a kaleidoscope. So kind of those two images together.
Brilliant. Just thinking about dusting 100 kaleidoscopes and how stressful that would be. So
I'm going to send you a picture of some of mine.
I want to see them. How old is the oldest one? I'm trying to imagine how old. Like, do they, were kaleidoscopes being made in the 19th century, 18th century? How?
The oldest one I have is, from the late 20s, but I think they were around before that.
This is a question, which is, did you ever consider writing or directing, or was it always about creating spaces for other people to tell or create their stories?
So funny. I was speaking to a friend of mine yesterday about designers' desire in theater to direct. I don't have that desire. I really love, I like being just slightly outside the center. I think it's a more interesting place to be. No interest in writing. I may have an interest in generating projects, which we're starting to think about doing, is being proactive. Our playground project, which was a pro bono post 9/11 project, was proactive. The viewing platform at Ground Zero, pro bono, proactive. So most of the proactive things we've done have been in response to proactive being a way to help a condition. But we're starting to look at being proactive in initiating projects. But in theater, directing or writing, I don't think is in the cards.
Okay. I'm going to ask you some more questions. If you could redesign one building or space, what would it be and why?
Oh my God. It would be, this answer could get me in trouble.
Of course, you have to choose a dead architect. What would it be?
It would be the Metropolitan Opera House.
Okay. The Met?
The Met, yeah, which I think is fantastic and an amazing building. But I think there's a way to have the theatricality of, I just think opera houses, I'm a big opera fan. And I think that would be an interesting building form to innovate that might cultivate more spontaneous performances in the lobby, uses that aren't just aligned with, and I think big theaters require reinvention right now because of the cost of putting on a production. So it would have to be with a lot of smart people who are interested in rethinking it. But I think probably a concert hall or an opera house.
Okay. That's a very exciting possibility. I can hear the phone being picked up in New York right now.
Yeah. Being told you're never going to work at the Metropolitan Opera House after that.
Yeah, exactly. You'll be barred for life. You'll turn up in a snazzy tuxedo the next time, and they'll just be like, "No, you're not coming in until you say you won't change a thing." Yeah. The Met's where the chandeliers come down. Is that right? Where they?
Which I love. I mean, I think that's such a brilliant. Yeah.
I've not actually.
Robin Williams referred.
Go on, sorry.
Robin Williams referred to those as Imelda Marcos as earrings, those chandeliers.
They are dramatic. I've never been in for a production, but I have got dressed up to go to the Met at my local cinema, which is the Duke's in Brighton, which is one of the oldest, I think, if not the oldest cinema continuously operating in the UK. And they have a beautiful proscenium, and they, and it feels like you can smell popcorn, but it feels like being at the opera. And the chandeliers come down and they go up. It's
two extreme
so
theater examples. Two extreme theater examples that I think are perfection. One is Disney Concert Hall, and the last time I went there, I actually got. I went back a second time to get tickets from a different view to be able to see the orchestra from a different view. And the Palau de la Música in Barcelona, which was done by a contemporary of Gaudi's called Luis Domènech, is, I think, a little perfect place.
Have you ever been to Wilton's Music Hall in London?
No.
Well, that's something to put on your list. So the next time you come, so it's a really good example of one of the few extant of music halls which were everywhere and a huge working class entertainment. And it's it's interesting when I saw your designs for the Hayes Theatre, it reminded me of it. But this is even smaller. It's almost like, being in a courtesan's cleavage. It's like you're kind of teetering the whole time. And I've never actually seen a great play there, but I love going there. And it's a brilliant space.
So I just had a realization when you mentioned Hayes, because I was going to say, interestingly, that was many, many years, more than 10 years of thinking about what I would do with the Broadway theater. Set design took, I think, long gestation periods of thinking about ideas before they form is a bigger part of our work than I've realized.
Well, that's an interesting realization to have, and it's an interesting one to end on. And who knows what's gestating right now, and what the circumstances we're in will let you discover and share. So, thank you so much, David. This has been an absolute joy and a pleasure. We have to leave it there, but David and I will be in the chat in a moment, so please refresh your glass and join us. You can buy Drama, published by Phaidon, in the Salon shop at bookshop.org or at any good indie bookshop. The winner of a copy of Drama is, I am told, someone called Lorraine Bonner. Lucky you, Lorraine. Enjoy that when you get it. It is brilliant. Salon returns on May 14th with a ticketed event hosted by writer and broadcaster Alexandra Hemmensley, whose latest book is the memoir Somebody to Love. Alex will be interviewing the bold and brilliant Paris Lees about her debut, What It Feels Like for a Girl. Tickets are £5 and you can get them on Eventbrite to watch live or afterwards. And then on June the 3rd, we have another launch. This is for An Extra Pair of Hands, Kate Moss's brilliant memoir about being a carer, and she'll be interviewed by writer and broadcaster Sam Baker. So you can get all details for that on our website. And if you want more of me, go to the BBC's iPlayer. There's a new series of Shelf Isolation with guests like Douglas Stewart and Lorraine Kelly. All that's left for me to say now is thank you to Team Salon, Team Rockwell and Team Phaidon, all of you for watching, and most of all again to David Rockwell. David, thank you so much. It's been a huge pleasure.
Thank you.
Enjoy the Oscars. It's time to lower the curtain. Good night.
Bye.
Sunrise, I'm on my own time and I can start something